a forge welded basket hilt. Hi, Daniel Tokar here at the Willow Forge in Shepherdstown, West Virginia. Continuing along with the new idea of little projects as part of the Blacksmith's dictionary. Last week I showed you how to do a forge weld. Well, this week we're going to take 4 1/4-inch rods, about 18 inches long, and we're going to forge weld them together on the end. Say the last 2 inches or so. The first part of that is I'm going to take a piece of iron binding wire and just wrap that around the bundle just to keep them kind of loosely aligned, because if you put all 4 of those in the fire on their own, it's very likely they'll just sort of scramble. So little bit of binding wire, 4 rods loosely put together. Okay, so we've got our bundle of 4. We're going to put it into the fire. We've got a nice deep bed of coke here. I've got some green coal, which I'm feeding in from the far side. Now, the scarf, the shape on the steel that allows the flux to escape when you're welding, you don't really have to do much with round rods welding to round rods, because the round shape of the rod keeps the is a natural sort of a scarf. I've got 20 mil Team Borax, and I've heated these to a dull red, and I put just a little bit of borax on all 4 of them. The rod should be hot enough that the borax just melts and forms a glass, a thin layer. You don't need a whole lot. Put it back in the fire. I've got my trusty 3-pound hammer. I've been using that hammer for 42 years. One of these days we'll have a conversation about dressing a hammer out, how to get the proper shape on a forging hammer. Most people have the peen way too sharp. You need to have kind of a flat peen. Now, because there are 4 rods and the 2 on the bottom get hot faster than the 2 on the top, you rotate the bundle in the fire every now and then. This helps it heat evenly. It's very hard to get video of the true colors of high temperature steel, because there's a lot of glare in the infrared and UV that the camera will pick up that the human eye doesn't see. So what I've had to do is put a cut filter on the camera and add an extra amount of illumination so you can see anything. All right. We're getting little sparkies. Get your hammer in your hand, pull it out, and just go. Gently. You don't need a huge amount of effort. And you'll see those 4 rods are now stuck together. There are still a lot of empty space in the center of that, so I'll do a consolidating weld where I take a little borax, just a little tiny bit, and I'm going to weld this again. You'll notice it did not take very long for this to come up to welding heat. Small enough stock, it should not take long. If you've got your fire set up correctly, something that size shouldn't take more than a minute or two to come up to a forge welding temperature. In the prior video, I mentioned that the forge welding temperature is dependent upon the alloy of the steel or iron. The more carbon content there is in the metal, the lower the forge welding temperature. This is mild steel that has probably between 10 and 20 points carbon. A point of carbon is 1/100th of 1% carbon. Still going to rotate it so that it heats evenly. As I mentioned in the other video, the borax will start disassociating at a fairly high temperature. So when you start seeing a color change in the flame coming out of the fire, that's the sodium coming off of the borax. And you can also have little windows. Like right now, I can actually see the rod in sort of the little cracks between the coke on top. It's a nice bright yellow. So, there we go again. Hammer in hand, rods. Because on stock this size, you only get about 15 seconds or so when it's at a welding temperature. Alright, I am going to take the wire brush and get the residual flux and scale off of there and see if you can see what that looks like. You'll notice that the rods just blend in together. In a good forge weld, you will not see any joint. Now what I'm going to do is draw the very tip of that out into a taper. Gravity. One thing you'll find out, there's an excess gravity in a blacksmith shop. Everything's heavy. All right. I did that just because this is a convenient time to put that taper on the top. I am now straightening out the rods for about 5 or 6 inches from where the weld is. So the weld starts right there, and all of that is welded together, and these are still 4 individual rods. I can take the wire off now. It's done its job. There it goes. And what I'm going to do next is cut this bundle off about a hand's length down here. I'm going to get this hot and use the hot cut to just cut that bundle off. Now, some people will weld together just the length they need, and then it becomes something of a handling problem. I am showing you this method only because this is a very convenient method for people who have trouble using tongs, haven't used tongs enough to be comfortable with them, or may not have tongs. So if you're a real beginner, this is a method that doesn't require a whole lot of extra tooling, but you might not have the right kinds of tongs. I use vice grips a fair amount. Okay, so I take that whole bundle, I do my little rough measurement, and say right about there. I've knocked all 4 of those. And you don't want to cut them all the way through, or you'll have a bundle of red hot rods on the floor. I always take my Hardy out before I do anything else, because it can be very dangerous to forge with one of those in the anvil. So I put these on the floor where I won't step on them. And I can use the vice grips to grab the bundle and just straightening the whole bundle out. You can see what that looks like. Now I'm going to take a 3/8 inch round rod, and I'm going to bevel the tip. Not so much scarfing it as giving it a little bit of a taper, so that as the rods get welded to it, there isn't a sharp transition. Because when you have sharp transitions, you can have little folds or shunts form. So you want to have a little bit of a taper rather than a sharp end. So I put that rod in. I will also put this bundle back in the fire as well. This also gets the center rod, the 3/8 rod, warm, because being in the center of the bundle, if it was room temperature when you put it together, it'll be hard to get the flux to stick to it. And you might conceivably burn the 1/4 inch rods on the outside before you get the inside rod up to temperature. So this is a way of preheating it and also putting a little bit of a scarf, a shape that will help the welding. And all you're going to do is hold the rod at an angle, hold your hammer at an angle, and rotate it and put a little bevel all the way around on the rod. Wouldn't hurt to take the scale off with a wire brush. You put just a tiny bit of borax on there, just enough to glaze it. It should just look like it's been painted with clear paint. Put this over here. I'll grab my bundle of 4 rods and I will get the scale off. I will flux them while they're still nice and hot. And you also have to think in terms of the flux being protection for the parts that aren't being welded. The flux makes it clean enough so that you can get a good weld, but it also protects the parts that are not being welded that come up to a high temperature. All right, here we go. Trying to get these 4. You'll see you want it to go in about an inch. Trying to get them evenly spaced all the way around. You see how that's 4 rods around 1? Now I'm going to put that back in the fire very gently because it's just sort of hanging together. People do all sorts of strange things to try and hold things together, and you can weld 2 separate pieces together by putting them together on the anvil, having them both come to the same heat in the fire and pulling them out. That's sometimes called a drop the tongs kind of weld. But in this case, I'm trying to show you the simplest case with the least amount of tools. I'm going to assume that a lot of you have never done any forge welding and may not have a lot of tools to work with. Now, because you've got thin sections and thick sections, you have to control your heat. If you come up to temperature too fast, you can actually burn those little rods on the outside before the big rod in the center is up to temperature. So sometimes you have to slow down and actually let the heat spread so that the big rod is at the same temperature as the little rods. It's also possible that only 1 or 2 of those rods will be at the same temperature and weld, so you may have to do 3 or 4 welds. Alright, that's very close. I'm going to put the hammer in my hand. I've got to be able to pick this up without having it come apart. Oops. Ah. See? That's stuck together. But it's still not much of a weld. A little more flux on it. Put it back in the fire. And again, for this sort of work, you're better off doing 3 or 4 light, short welds than trying to get it all welded together in one go. It takes a fair amount of practice to get something with different sized pieces so all at the welding temperature at the same time. Now that I've got this sort of stuck together a little bit, it's easier for me to rotate it in the fire, because before, if I rotated it, all I'd be doing is rotating the big rod in the center. The outside cage was not actually stuck. So rotate it a little bit. I can also poke a little window, a little hole where I can actually see the rods in the fire. You don't need much of a window, just enough so that you can see the temperature. For mild steel, it's almost like the temperature of the fire and the temperature of the work are the same. You get a nice light yellow color on the steel. It's also, when I pull this out, I'm going to orientate it so that I'm basically forging on the diagonals, that the two rods will be top and bottom, and then I'll rotate it and do the two side rods top and bottom. There we go again. Again, you can see it's getting a little more consolidated and a little more weld. I'm going to do a third weld. And that should blend it all together. What I'm trying to get across by doing it this way is it's entirely possible to do this all in one weld, but that takes a lot of practice. And rather than having you be discouraged by the fact that it might take you 3 or 4 welds to get this all welded together and nice and smooth, I'm going to show you how that looks doing it with 3 or 4 welds. You shouldn't get terribly anxious about not doing it all in one weld. You'll get there eventually, but you need the practice. All right, I'm looking through a little hole in the top of the fire here, a little window in the coat. Again, the operative word here is you want to heat fast enough to be efficient, but slow enough that you don't burn one part of it out before the other parts are up to temperature. The whole thing has to come up to a nice, even temperature. Otherwise, it won't stick. Right, there we go again. All right. And as you can see, there is still, right there, a little transition. So we're going to do yet another forge weld. You can see it's actually quite well welded. But what we're doing now is blending and tapering those 4 rod ends into the body so it's a nice smooth transition. One of the reasons you do forge welding is because it's a smooth, aesthetically pleasing joint. You could arc weld things together and then grind and forge them. But the whole tradition of blacksmithing was to learn how to forge weld, and this automatically gives you a nice smooth transition. Why fake something when you can do it the original way? Right, I've got a little window that I've poked in there so I can actually see the steel. And again, you'll notice I'm not hitting this very hard. I'm actively avoiding hitting it very hard. You want fast, accurate light blows, because again, you've got 10 to 15 seconds on stuff this size when it's at a welding heat. Anything you do after that is just moving the metal around. If it's not stuck by then, it won't be stuck. Okay. Some of you probably have already gotten ahead on this project and figured out what this is all about. These 4 rods welded at the end of a longer rod. This is going to be a basket hilt. Right, coming up to temperature. Wire brush this, you'll see that what I've got is a nice smooth transition, a taper between the body of the rod and the basket. It's a nice smooth transition. I'll show it to you. You see how you can see where the rods start to blend together, and they transition into a nice smooth transition into the rod that you don't see any joints there. And you don't want to reduce the diameter of the rod where there's a joint. That sort of spoils the effect. So okay, to get this ready for the next part, all I'm doing is making the 4 rods into a compact straight mass. I'm going to take a little bit of residual flux off. Now, I'm going to have to change the position of the camera so you'll be able to see the next bit. So, put this in the fire to heat up slowly, and I'm going to change the camera angle. Okay. What I've got here is a bending wrench that I made up that's basically just an old monkey wrench with a handle welded onto it. And I've opened it up a little bit, and I've opened up the vise a little bit so that they're about the size for the bundle of rods that we're going to twist. So I'm heating this up in the fire, and I'm rotating them so that all 4 rods will have about the same twist, the same heat. So they'll twist evenly. Right, I bring them out, put them in the vise, not too tight. Grab that square shank that I made, that taper, and I twist it, counting the twists. So there's a half a twist. There's a full twist. There's a twist and a half. I'll take the wire brush and you'll see how nice that twist is. Now while it's still hot, I'm going to back it up a half a rotation, and you'll notice that it opens up and makes a basket. Okay. This is the traditional basket handle that was put on fireplace pokers by blacksmiths. Now you'll notice that because the rods were not even, I have a little bit of a discrepancy between the spacing in the basket. So what you do is you take a pair of tongs and you pull the rods that are too far apart back toward each other, gently adjusting it until you have everything even. And that's an acceptable basket. The rest of the fireplace poker will be forging the taper and making a little loop on the end, and forge welding and making the poker and claw on the front. And I think I might save that for another one because we're already running pretty long. But you can see what forge welding is about is allowing you to make nice smooth transitions between various size stock. It would be fairly difficult to do that nicely with an arc welder or gas welding. It could be done, but it would not be as easy or as fluid as doing this. You get a nice smooth transition and a nice basket. Anyway, more later. Bye.